think that what people are seeking is an experience of being alive so that they can experience the full rapture of being alive. In essence, what it is to be a human is to feel our aliveness, which means to reconnect with our senses. It involves feeling our living process. And that also involves having the ability to experience a range of emotions, what we call good and what we call bad, tolerating our sadness, tolerating our anger, tolerating our joy. They're just sensory experiences. So our bodies are doing this and they're holding tight, holding back the emotion, and it requires so much energy. So when we experience what people call release, it's just experiencing emotion finally. The muscles let go. And when they let go, we have more energy and we have more vitality.
Hence an aliveness in the heart.
Yes. Hence an aliveness in the heart. Hence an aliveness all over. And like, oh, I don't have to work so hard. And this is why we see what people call this magical healing occurs after they finally feel.
Yeah.
Healing doesn't have to be hard, I think is actually what I said. Yeah.
Which I think is really the whole point for me anyway, of being here, is to live from my heart that is fully alive, and that means feeling it all. Well, hey there, and welcome back to Fire and Soul, the space to awaken your divine power and further activate your inner awakening. Everywhere we look, it seems the collective's mental psyche is becoming increasingly more fragile. And I know I include myself amongst those people in moments for sure, as I imagine you do as well. So it's never become more imperative, in fact, essential, that we learn how to turn inward and to truly take care of ourselves in the moments that matter. And there are a lot of them. And today's guest, Will Rezin, is a really special soul and a man on a mission who is going to take us through a beautiful weaving of trauma work, somatic integration, as well as how to cultivate an authentic aliveness in our hearts, and really amplifying the core theme in this message is that healing doesn't necessarily have to be hard. And so we definitely drop into that right at the top. But this conversation is really full and exciting and deep and informative and inspiring all the way through. So I encourage you to listen to the very end. Before I give a little bit of Will's bio, I want to also invite the ladies who are listening, which is you as a predominant listenership. And that is to join me if you feel called in our brand new, well, it's about 6, 7 weeks old now, free gathering online called the Women's Wisdom Circle. This is a place to really learn how to open your heart and to create a more harmonic life in service to the whole. We meet on Zoom every Thursday at 12 p.m. Eastern. So that's Texas time, Central time for those of you who need that extra little bit of information. This is a great place to come in and gather and see what happens. And what I love about this is as inspired by my friend Jay Cohen, who's been on the show a couple of different times and will be back. And he is a true masterful teacher in the Gene Keys, but he encouraged me to do something like this with the Gene Keys Pulse as our prompt. And the Gene Keys Pulse is the gene key that the collective is experiencing as a cycle about every 6 days. And so that's the prompt that we come in with, and we have stories that we share, we have teachings, we have musings, and we have connection. Ultimately, it is a beautiful bridge to freedom in your heart and a beautiful sense of belonging. And you can join whenever you want, and it's totally free. Now, also, if you feel called, I am opening up my mentorships again. I haven't done this in well over a year. I've had my schedule full, but there's now spaciousness for 2. And if you're interested in exploring what that might look like together, whether you'd be interested in private mentorship that's really spiritual partnership, the way that I see it and come to it, it really is for life or business, but ultimately all things are spiritual. So it's a beautiful way in which we can work together in however it serves you most. And you can head on over to my website, michelle-sorrow.com, and check that out. And then if you feel called to complete the inquiry, and then the next step would be for us to explore on a discovery connection call. And I would welcome anyone here who feels called to connect in that way. All right, back to Will. So Will is the founder of Trauma Somatics, where he has trained over 400 plus practitioners in over 26 countries in trauma-informed somatic work. with a background in attachment theory. Oh, we go over that too today. Stress physiology and somatic healing. Will helps individuals and professionals cultivate a deeper understanding of the body's innate healing capacity. He works with high performing individuals through deep transformational work, as well as practitioners looking to bring more nervous system informed approaches to their work. This is one of my favorite conversations I've had in a really long time, and it feels really timely. So I'm going to ask you a favor, my friend. If you get the value out of this and it's useful for you on your journey, that I imagine it will be, please share it with at least one person who needs to hear this message today. Thank you so much. And without further ado, please enjoy. Healing doesn't have to be hard. The power of somatic trauma and finding aliveness with Will Rezin. Okay, I'm just hitting record. You guys are going to get this midstream, although I obviously just added a little bit of a highlight. Will and I met briefly at a dear friend, Ruby Freeman's birthday gathering at Heal the Horses Ranch. I think that's what it is. Yeah, Will?
Healing with
Healing
horses,
with horses.
I
Thank you for
think.
that gracious reframe. And so it's just kind of like putting some connection points with Will together behind the scenes for literally a total of about 2 minutes. And I'm like, wait,
Mhm.
this is already so good. Let's just hit record. And that is the way it turns out we both prefer it to be, just natural and real and raw. So I want to pick up with what you just said because I've been saying
Yeah.
this, but I'm not the professional in the room, you know. But I've been saying this for about 6 months because I'm watching so many people go to hard, 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 dark, dark, dark. It's just, and maybe listen, everyone's on their own path. And I do believe that things are perfectly in order in many spiritual ways. But I also have learned for myself, it doesn't have to be hard.
Yeah.
The healing, all of that, it doesn't have to be hard. And you said hard is, what did you say?
Healing doesn't have to be hard, I think is actually what I said. Yeah.
It's exactly. And I'm like, oh, a professionalist said it. It's so good. And what brought me to saying that and then you reflecting is because I was telling you we were talking about medicine journeys, plant
Mhm.
medicine.
Yeah.
And some of my greatest growth has been through plant medicine. But back in the day, starting in 2019 with ayahuasca, I had to
Mhm.
learn in the journeys hard, like be burned to death, like literally
Yeah.
scary, hard, dark stuff.
Wait,
And then
did you say you started there?
started with ayahuasca, never even had done like
Oof. Yeah.
ecstasy.
Yeah.
Yes, Will, thank you. Yeah.
I ended there.
So no plant medicine anymore?
It's been a while.
It's
Yeah.
been a while. Well,
It's
see,
been a
that's
while.
kind of the way it goes a lot for a lot of people as I'm discovering for my own self. But
Hmm.
I didn't think I was doing the medicine out of all fairness. I was giving it as a gift to my mother. We were invited with this small group and it just felt so right. And it was on her bucket list number one to go to Rhythmia Life Advancement Center in Costa Rica, which you may have heard of.
I have.
That was on her bucket list. Jack Canfield is a dear friend and mentor of mine. He had
Hmm.
said, "Why don't you come with us and my peers and family members?" And I was like, that's kind of like a really nice invitation.
Yeah.
And but I still said no because I was so scared. And so I was telling my mom about that, and she was like, "What? This is like at the top of my bucket list, like what I would
Mhm.
give." And I was like, okay, if I ask him and he says yes, that I can bring you, are you serious? And she's like, oh, yes. Because my mother loves to say yes as a classic manifesting
Yeah.
generator. But she meant yes in that moment. It's and same
Yeah.
here. Um, so I had to triple check. Are you sure? Anyway, we went and I wasn't going to sit. There was no way I was going to sit. I was way too afraid to sit. But it was like literally an hour before where I was like, okay, I'm going to go in. So, and that trip was amazing. But my point is that these days, when I sit with medicine, which is only about 3 times a year, and it has to be completely natural, no synthetics, just eat the mushrooms, that kind of
Mhm.
thing.
Yeah.
And the message is as easy as right. So it's like as soft as a rose pink, as a pink rose petal, and it's just like scooping the insides, putting them into my heart for transmutation. And it's
Mhm.
just this beautiful, gracious energy. And so I've been sharing with all of my clients the last 6 months, it doesn't have to be hard.
Mhm.
And I was just like, wait, is that just me? And it's like, no, because now we're all kind of our buoyancy,
Mhm.
our capacity to be with whatever is on our path internally or externally. There's a softening to the edge. But I would love for you to talk about that and how it really works from your language and
Yeah.
your expertise, because it's so beautiful to hear you say that too.
Mhm. I'm going to say the same thing you're saying, and I'm going to use some references to science.
Okay.
So I love that we're in this conversation. I just keynoted a retreat last week, and you know, as I arrived and I got to know the group, I thought I knew what I was going to say. And then the more I got to know the people, the humans, the individuals that were there, the more I realized I didn't know exactly what I was going to say. And I got rid of my outline. And funny enough, the only thing I read was my bio. And then I just got rid of it. And I started teaching, talking. And one of the points that I felt was really important was what we're talking about today. So
Mm,
from a physiological standpoint, too much intensity is not generative to the development of the organism.
mm,
So there's Hans Selye did research and his research was around what became termed as stress. So we think about stress, different kinds of stress. We think about it, we use that word because of Hans' work.
mm,
Distress, eustress, stress.
yeah,
So there are kinds of stress that really tax and deteriorate our capacity. There are
mhm,
kinds of stress that are good for our capacity. But healing requires small, manageable chunks of stress, not big cathartic expressions.
mm,
Because trauma disrupts our ability to have a fluid experience. It lodges patterns of protection in our body. And when we go to heal that, if we have big, intense experiences, the body goes, that's the same as or equal to the point that was too much.
mm,
And the body can contract more or get stuck in a flight or a fight response, deeper, embedded, and we don't end up feeling healing.
mm.
We end up feeling relief. And so it was like there'll be a peak, and afterwards, oh, I feel so relieved. I'm not in a stressed out state anymore.
Yeah.
But the body isn't necessarily learning how to do something new.
Mm,
It does learn how to do something new through like incremental increases of tolerating small enough amounts of stress. So actually, it doesn't have to be hard. In fact, it's better when it's not too hard, right? Some stress is good. Use stress is what it's coined, right? Like the useful stress.
mhm,
But too much and we break down. The analogy that I like to use is an analogy around exercise. Part of exercise and growing muscles involves tearing the muscle tissue. So we have to have a certain amount of difficulty, but too much difficulty, and the muscle cannot repair
mhm,
and it breaks down.
mhm,
Not enough difficulty, and the muscle doesn't grow,
mhm,
right? So ayahuasca can be useful for some people, and it can stimulate really amazing insights. And the question I often ask people before they go in, or the recommendations that I make, are what's your capacity for stress tolerance? Like, can your body or nervous system handle a huge peak and come back into a natural state? So
mhm.
that rhythmic fluid movement between states. And that's what resilience is. So like, imagine a cat. A cat sleeping in the sun. It's comfortable. It's relaxed. Its muscle tone is soft. There's a loud noise. The let's just say a broom falls over. The cat springs into action and jumps up in the air and looks around and maybe even scampers away. And then it looks, it's just a broom. Goes back to its spot, it lays down and goes right back to sleep.
Really good
There's no
analogy.
there's no interruption. It's a
Mhm,
fluid movement from resting to like agility to activated back to resting.
yeah.
Right? I can mobilize and then I can go back to rest. And when we experience something that's too much for our body, we get stuck. It's a lack of fluidity in the movement. It'd be like if my hand was sort of choppy
Mhm.
instead of being able to fluidly move,
Mhm.
right? That fluid movement between states. I can go from resting to engaged back to resting, and
Mhm.
I'm not stuck in one or the other. And too much intensity can keep us stuck,
Mhm.
and it prevents the growth of capacity. So
Mm.
your intuition is guiding you in the right direction.
Amazing. Well, thank you for that. And it's so cool to just to feel into things that resonate as truth for me and like but there's like this question of like, wait, is that okay to say? You know what I mean? Because, or is that
Mhm.
just a personal experience? And so I really appreciate you sharing this and also recognizing that that was the pulse of the room at that point when you noted
Yeah,
it, right?
yeah,
And by the way, beautiful leadership because it just shows just how present you were to pick up on the energetics of the collective versus, being so attached to what you thought they needed. And they were showing you,
yeah.
expressing, frequentially, vibrationally, whatever what was really happening. And that's probably a pretty good snapshot of the collective.
I think so. And practitioners in general, therapeutic work in general, personal development work in general, and we've had this misunderstanding since the 60s and 70s.
Mm.
Even something called bioenergetics is misunderstood.
Yeah. Tell me about it. What is your understanding of that? Because I have
Yeah.
a little bit. This was what I experienced. My little itty bitty interpretation of is when I met you, we were at Healing with Horses, excuse me, Healing with Horses, a beautiful day. Um, I think you and I had a total of 3 words, but
Yeah.
there was your bioenergetic field that my bioenergetic field, otherwise known as an aura, was responding to in some way where I was just like, beautiful presence, very loving, very kind, very gentle, very, very present and grounded.
Mhm.
And I don't know what he does or who he is in the world, but I think at that point I just looked you up and I was like, love to have you on the podcast because we haven't had, and I'm just grateful that we are in
Yeah.
each other's lives because I've never had anyone to speak about trauma and somatics and all the things that we're talking about
Mhm.
today that we're going to dive deeply into. But yes, back to what it really is for you, bioenergetics.
Well, so Wilhelm Reich was a student of Freud, and Reich studied energy. He studied energy in the body and pulsation of that energy in the body, and he also created something called I think it's the orgon generators. So it's a generation like generating energy. And his work was both scientific with the working with energy, and it was also interestingly scientific with working with the body and the energy centers in the body.
Mm,
His work developed over time, and then a man named Alexander Lowen found Reich's work and studied with Reich on an ongoing basis. And they created, or he created something he called bioenergetics, which is working with the energy in the bodies of
mhm,
individuals. Over the years and in the 70s, 80s, and beyond, there was a misunderstanding that started to grow with facilitators of form of this work,
mm,
where the assumption is in order to heal, we have to have big, expressive, emotionally cathartic experiences.
mm,
And so I've experienced some people who facilitated this work, and, well, not specifically that work, they called it this. And it involved really big peak emotional experiences. That's not actually what these teachers were teaching to do. They were teaching people to be able to get to a place where they could tolerate the bigness of their energy.
mm,
But it was gradual and progressive, the learning of that. It wasn't just go to the peak. I mean, if I wanted to hike Kilimanjaro tomorrow, I couldn't, not successfully. I would need to gradually increase my capacity to handle that kind of stress.
mhm,
So if we go right for the big thing, it overwhelms us.
mm,
And and I'm actually quite fascinated with the origins of this field, the field of somatics, as it's called. And reading Lowen's work and listening to lectures of his, he talks about incremental tolerance of stress
mm,
that's supported by an individual that can provide care and like that support, essentially supported
mm,
by an individual that can provide support. I know it sounds kind of redundant, but there's a certain containment that's possible, and we don't go over that threshold, and everybody's threshold's different.
Mm.
Now, in the therapeutic world, we have models for this. Dr. Dan Siegel created a model called the window of tolerance. And if we understand stress physiology, we learn about something called polyvagal theory. Dr. Stephen Porges has done extensive research on the nervous system, the autonomic nervous system. And when we put these two things together, Dan Siegel said, well, interesting. We have this zone of arousal, which is basically meaning a zone where we can handle our feelings. Outside of this zone, the window of tolerance, something primal happens and our instinct kicks in. We either try to fight, we try to flee, or we become immobilized,
Mhm.
right? But within this zone, we can be socially engaged, right? And Dr. Porges was researching, and he said, yeah, that's where we are engaged with what's called the ventral vagal complex, which is the vagus nerve, plays a role in this, right? And so we as creatures are social creatures, which means that we require social interaction. But when we experience trauma, which is, let me define that term real quick for us all. Trauma is the lingering psychosomatic response to events that were overwhelming or too much. And basically, think about it, it's not the head injury, it is the concussion that follows. Not
Yes.
everybody has a concussion from a head injury, but if we do, it's the living memory of the event that continues on in the body, right? So when we experience trauma, our body's ability to be socially engaged becomes taxed because there's some form of threat reaction that's still kind of stuck in the body. And so, threading all of this together, what does this all mean for what we're talking about here? Um, when these scientists, we could say, these explorers of consciousness, and I mean, Dr. Dan Siegel's work is phenomenal. It's all centered around mindfulness and meditation now, and he's taking a very analytical approach to mapping meditation. It's fascinating.
Mm.
He and Jack, he's worked with Jack Canfield. Jack? No. Um,
Jack Cornfield.
Cornfield, thank you.
Yes, yes, yes. I
Yes,
recognize the
extensively.
name. Yes.
Yeah, and his stuff, I mean, he's the Mind Sight Institute, but mind not as in thought, but as
Yes.
in like more of what the Buddhists would think of as mind, this consciousness. It's fascinating. But understanding the nervous system helps us make sense of these things that have been a part of culture for thousands of years. This is why this works the way that it works. And so this zone, this window, is the place where we can tolerate intensity.
Mm.
Things affect this,
Mhm.
and sometimes we can't tolerate much.
Mm.
So if I'm tired, if I've had too much caffeine, if I'm not exercising enough, if I'm exercising too much, my zone is smaller.
Mhm.
My tolerance for stress is less.
Mhm.
So over time, I want to build that by gradually moving between intensity and rest.
Mm.
In the same way we would build muscle. So when we go for big, intense experiences with the assumption that we need to cry it out, shake it out, emote it out, what ends up happening is we recreate a stress reaction in our body that's too much for our body
Mm.
instead of these incremental increases.
Yeah, okay, this is so good. And I can't help but think about another thing that we were talking about before I hit record that ties into this. And that is, you said it's not about, what did you say, hitting your head is about the concussion.
Mhm.
Yeah. So it's not about the COVID era. It was how we were forced to respond to it, not in incremental measures, just like
Mhm.
this. And it was a one for all, protocol. And I think one of the biggest epidemics on this planet right now amongst humanity is the PTSD that is still stored within us. And yet, who has the capacity to really work with us? If you go to a traditional psychiatrists, psychologists,
Yeah.
trauma-informed specialists, not probably of your ilk, but they have no reference point for those who saw it a different way than what was classically seen by the majority back then, right?
Yeah.
Many more people are waking up to that there might have been some other things happening. In fact, now most of us are pretty convinced that's the case. Everyone listening to this show, that's for sure.
Mhm.
And so I literally saw like a 12-step program needing to be created and made available for everywhere around the world where you could just come in and like share your story for what you're holding, what you're carrying, especially just trying to be in the world and recognizing that probably one out of three people can maybe, no, one out of four can maybe see what you see, but the rest can't. So, how to stay in
Yeah.
connection with them while recognizing that the context is from very extremely different lenses of perception. We're seeing that play out in the political,
Oh,
climate, like
yeah.
all the things, right? So I'll just pause there because it feels like there's a question in there, but I don't probably need to pose the question. But I'm also just sorry, I realize I'm in this new home and I'm figuring out, segue real quick, commercial. I am figuring out where to podcast. And it turns out this time of the year in this room, the sun is so beautiful and I'm so grateful, but it's like pouring in these tightly
You just look
bound.
like you're angelic in
This
some way. Like
is
there's like, oh,
Thank you, because the sun is like source. It's God. It's like, oh my God, I love the sun. But I'm like, but right now, thank you, thank you, thank you. And like literally the blinds, everything is like shut tight.
uh-huh.
Okay, so I digress. But my point is that, well, I think you got the point, right? But I would love to hear what you have to share about that in context to what you just shared, because I have been not knowing until this moment and didn't think about it in advance of having you on the show of how many times I have longed for someone to hold me through certain moments that felt really hard when tears come up and I'm like, wow, I thought I was really integrated on that. And I thought
Yeah,
I was like, whoa, it's so deep still, and it's just grief, grief,
yeah,
grief.
yeah.
So there's something in there for you to pick up on.
I'm with you. Yeah. I'm going
Yeah.
to start with a first thought, and then I'm sure we'll find our way back to the piece that you're talking about. I think it's all connected. So, I don't know if we define this. I'm a teacher and a guide. I support individuals one on one, and I also teach practitioners, and they're all over the world. And really three things I'm teaching about are trauma, the field of somatics, and how to sort of live somatically, and then attachment.
Yes.
And so when we have this global event that affects our ability to be socially engaged with the world, that also attacks the nervous system in some way. And I'm not a scientist, so I can't speak to the particulars on how this particular thing affected us, but I do know I had the Wuhan version of the virus, and I know that it affected my nervous system. It affected my sense of smell. It affected cognition. And so it affects us. When we have a combination of these kinds of things happening simultaneously, our biological need for connection is interrupted, it's thwarted. We do our best to come up with a strategy to get our needs met. And for many of us, that was get online, interact with people via the internet, get on Zoom with people, maybe end up in a fight with family because we're choosing to be social,
Mhm.
right? Or maybe end up in a fight with friends because they're not being social and we are, right? The risk of not belonging. For
Mm,
many of us,
mm,
the risk of being alienated or attacked because we speak about our opinions,
yes.
right? Or the very real experience of being completely cut out of our friends' lives
Yes.
or people that we love,
Yeah.
right? For our bodies, that is a life threatening scenario.
Mm,
So, biologically, we need others to survive. So, there's an instinct in us when we are born, when we come out of mom, right, of mother, we are of mother, and our nervous systems are the same. And we cannot survive alone. So, it is an instinct in us to need another. Right? And advanced esoteric spiritual philosophy would say we don't need anything to survive. And I believe that's a trap
mm, mm,
because we begin to reject our very nature.
mm,
And in the process of rejecting our nature, we're rejecting our aliveness.
mm, mm,
Right. So there is this something that happened to all of us collectively on this planet, and we went through it around the same time. And that is Is it safe to belong? Is it safe to socialize? I need to socialize. I can't socialize. I'm going to socialize. I might be rejected for socializing. And a virus, engineered or not, however we want to perceive that, that attacks the nervous system.
Mhm.
And the part of the nervous system that plays a crucial role in social engagement, right? The ventral vagal complex. So we have the need for connection, and then we have our reaction to not getting the need met, which is to start saying that you're a threat, you're a threat, you're a threat, you're a threat, right? And I need to belong somewhere. I need to belong somewhere. I belong over here. I belong over here, right? You're the enemy. You're the enemy. Really, I'm scared. I'm scared too, right? I need to belong. I need to feel safe. I need to belong. I need to feel safe too.
Mm.
Really, we could distill almost everything that's going down globally to those two things. I need to feel safe. I need to belong, right? This primal instinctive thing. And then our mind makes meaning and it sort of like sits on top of all of that instinctive behavior.
Mhm.
So coming around to sort of the grief that you were talking about, there's this, is there someone somewhere safe for me to be seen? Is there a place where I'm accepted, where I belong, where I'm not judged, where I can just let myself be, right? And then when we do, or when we find a place like that, it's like, oh yeah, I can reconnect to some of the emotion that's here.
Mm.
Because what happened during all of those years? I constricted my body so as to not express it. I constricted my neck, my throat, my diaphragm. It's constricted. I'm tight. I don't notice it anymore because I've been constricted for so long. But that constriction kept me, quote unquote, safe enough that I could interact with the situation. And so I'd say, yeah, it was traumatic for many people
Mm.
because there's still a reaction happening in their body. Right? So trauma isn't the thing. Pop culture now says, oh, I watched that movie. I was so traumatized by that. No, you were just stressed, maybe triggered. But trauma is an an instinctive reaction to sensory input that doesn't necessarily that's disproportionate with the situation. We can put it that way from
Yeah.
an objective standpoint.
Yeah. Yeah, and then when you're around those or you feel called to, organize around those, spend time around those yeah, we can relax a little. That was the call to Austin for me.
Hmm.
I loved Los Angeles. I lived there my entire adult life and 30 years basically. And yeah, there was just this call from the spring of 21 when I was starting to see things a little bit differently than pretty much all my neighbors. And I was cast out of the tribe. And it was
Yeah.
really painful. And these are people that I, would do barbecues with every Friday. We had this small little complex, blocks from the beach in Santa Monica. And it was heaven. I never, ever, ever thought I would ever leave. Like it would just be like my
Yeah.
little place. And then maybe one day somewhere else, in addition.
Hmm.
Uh, One day when I walked out not wearing a mask to get the mail that was outside under the sky, yeah, that was the end of my association to that tribe. And
Right.
so that was really painful. Now I've done, it just feels like there's been like, a half a dozen true dark nights since then and so much deconstruction. And so I've been with really deep parts of myself, but that's where it's like, wow, no matter how much I see the threads that must be loved, must be seen, must be embraced, must be fully integrated. And not numbed out. I don't drink. Just all of that came with that whole season of just, it was really a beautiful gift ultimately. But, then you see all parts of yourself, which is a whole nother kind of a journey, hence more dark nights, which again wouldn't change for anything. But well, I think I'm the one doing so much of this work, and a lot of people don't have that privilege, don't have that luxury, just for time's sake alone, right? Just so in the matrix, so to speak. We all are, but I have a very gracious schedule. that I'm extremely grateful for. So if it comes on like that, like a tsunami of just not just that's pretty extreme. It'll just come up and it's like, whoa, there's just emotion. But I notice it's always in around the throat chakra. And it's
Mhm.
where I was afraid to speak my truth.
Yeah.
So to your
Yeah. So
point, and that would be the somatic release, right? Can we talk about, yeah, those
yes.
distinctions?
Yes. Yeah. And I'm going to offer a nuance on language here, right?
Right.
So we don't ever release emotion. We
Mm,
don't ever release trauma. What we do is we regain access to the energy that our body's been using to hold it.
yes, yes, where it's so bound up.
Yes.
Yeah.
So one of the places where we hold tightness with our musculature when emotion comes up is our larynx.
Mm,
It is right here.
wow.
That's how we inhibit or prevent the expression of emotion. So
Mm,
we clench. And if the listener could see me, I'm squeezing my throat and swallowing tightly. Right? We do that. We learn it when we're really, really young. Don't cry. Don't cry. Everything's okay. It's okay. You don't need to cry.
mhm,
Don't cry here. Not here.
mhm,
Right? We get scolded or we get told that we're okay because somebody else is uncomfortable with our emotional experience.
mhm,
So what do? We learn how to constrict around it. And so it becomes a pattern that's just a habit,
mhm,
right? And when it's not safe enough, quote unquote, to express or experience ourselves in front of another, we hold it. And then our body holds on to it and it remembers it. And then when we're softening and we're feeling safe enough, it starts to come up. Like, oh my gosh. And you use the word tsunami and then you caught yourself and you're like, I don't know that that's the right word. It's probably not the right word all the time, but there probably are moments where it feels
moments.
like a wave.
Mhm,
I use that analogy a lot when I'm working with people
mm,
because there'll be the feelings, the sensory experience starting low in our belly and moving upward through our chest. And it's like this sort of like the central channel where the chakras are. And, we can feel it in our sensory receptors and it moves upward through our throat. And if we don't constrict, it'll like the sensation will move up into our eyes and come out as little drops. And then it moves.
mm,
If we don't get caught in making pictures in our mind or saying words in our mind or holding our muscles tight, it passes quickly, like a wave. And then if we can learn how to, after we come in on the wave, stand up and stand on the shore and feel it tugging at us, but not get back in, then we're not thrashed about.
mm,
We can experience that movement of energy and we regain access to it.
mm,
And
mhm,
I'll make an analogy here. Um, Something happens biologically when we do this constriction over and over again. So the motor cortex in our brain is involved in voluntary and involuntary muscular contraction. When we contract over and over and over again, the brain stops noticing that we're contracted. So we end up with like 20% contraction in places in our body.
mm,
Most people start to notice this in their bodies by the time they hit 40. And between 40 and 50 and 40 to 60, we start to notice aches and pains, things that are like, why is this suddenly happening? I rolled over, I sneezed funny, and now I threw my back out, right? We hear this a lot, and it's a joke, so much so that we see memes and videos and silly like, cartoons about this happening. This is the pattern. The body's been constricted for so long, it's forgotten. An early somatic pioneer, Thomas Hanna, calls it sensory motor amnesia. But what happens when the brain becomes aware that it's doing it is it lets go. And think about how much energy, like if everybody listening right now makes a fist, balls up your hand, and holds it tightly. Don't stop holding it tightly until I tell you to stop holding it tightly. So if I kept talking for the next 20 minutes and I didn't tell you to let go, your hand would be so tired and you would start to run out of energy. Even right now, you're like, "Ah, I'm holding it tight. I'm holding it tight." Right? Okay, we can let go now. And if we soften it, notice how you're not it's different in your body.
yeah, mm,
So our bodies are doing this and they're holding tight, this like holding back the emotion. and it requires so much energy. So we have to constantly be making extra energy to hold our muscles tight. So when we experience an emotional, what people call release, it's just experiencing emotion finally. The muscles let go. And when they let go, we have more energy and we have more vitality.
Hence an aliveness in the heart.
Yes. Hence an aliveness in the heart, hence an aliveness all over. And like, oh, I don't have to work so hard. And this is why we see what people call like this magical healing occurs after
Yeah.
they finally feel.
Yeah. This is so beautiful, Will, because the last couple of years, year and a half, I've had exactly what you just described happen. And I've had it while on a little plant medicine or not. So it's happened in various different ways. But I can specifically recall two instances right now that I want to share to kind of highlight what I've never had words for in the way that you just described, because I've also never felt more alive in my heart. I just every day feels like a magical miracle. And I've been feeling this way for a few months now. So definitely went through my arriving into Austin initiation, which apparently is perfunctory. I also arrived in the summer. And when you've been on the coast of California your entire life, because before LA, it was the Central Coast, like Pismo Beach. And you don't move to Austin when it's 100 degrees, and it stays that way for 4.5, 5 months. Might want to try that in incremental phases, like you talked about earlier. So I put my body in some, I did traumatize my body. I was so angry. Anyway, before that, I was also living in LA and really sort of it felt like I was in the midst of, I made up a story of like, this is real Hunger Games. This is real life Hunger Games. They're hunting us down. And so I didn't know how to be in the world. But I went to this one particular plant medicine journey in the Hollywood Hills. And I just literally said, and I'm not religious. My listeners know that I'm not religious, but I heard myself say, I want to walk with Jesus
Mm,
into the field of divine mother's love. And
yeah.
I had never really talked like that, but it was so deep in me. And so all night, I didn't really talk to anyone else much. I didn't know anyone there anyway, but I just sat next to a roaring fireplace. It was November of 2023, actually.
Mm,
And I just tears just all night, just kept, and I didn't know what they were. I mean, I could make up stories, but all night. And then, like, the beginning of the next several months, I just never felt more whole. Didn't even feel like I had been healed. I just felt like I had been returned, if that makes sense.
yeah.
But there was definitely a healing. And then fast forward to just February 12th, I was at the Awaken Ranch here in Austin, and they were doing this private ceremony before they opened to the public. And I got invited to sit with mushrooms, and I had never sat with psilocybin and the kind that you eat. So now,
Yeah.
no, I can't do anything different. But all
Yeah.
night long, I knew I was ready to see something from when I was 5. Then I'd always just said that wasn't a big deal. That person was 8. That's not a big deal. It's not a big deal. Turns out to my 5-year-old, it was a big deal. You know?
That is important what you just said. Uh,
Okay, good.
it's so important what you just said. Looking back as an adult, oh, it's not that big a deal. There's just 3 years difference, right?
We were
But to
just
my
kids,
5 year old,
little kids.
but we were just kids. But to my 5 year old self, it's a huge deal.
Huge deal.
To my body that was still developing, to my personality that didn't know any different, it was a huge deal.
Huge deal. It was so connected to where was my dad? Where was my
Yeah,
protector?
that's right.
It was so connected to so many deep pieces. And so I knew that I was ready to be with that. And so I took that intention just to be with it, to heal it, anything that needs to come through in this beautifully curated, well-held space, just super sacred night. I want to give Awaken Ranch a big shout out because they're doing really good work right now. And 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 so the mushrooms allowed me to see everything I needed to see, but through this lens of like, there was this woman who was a practitioner in Reiki, and she just kind of held sacred space with me. There were no details that needed to be spoken of. I just released, I just cried. I could feel it, I could see it, I knew it. I was back in the moment. I was seeing it from divine perspective. It was so beautiful. But I feel like every part of what needed to come through to return me back to me fully and wholly, like HONWO. Um, I have feel like I've been in this chronic state of bliss ever since. I know it's only been less than a month, but something shifted.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there's more because even as you just said that you could actually stop me and say, wait, that's big, that's important.
Mhm.
I haven't spoken to someone like you about this. I just know that in that moment, it felt like there was nothing to heal once I got through that, once it felt
Mhm.
complete. But then
Yeah.
as you bring it up, I'm like, oh, but yeah, can I still just be with that part of my little
Mhm.
girl that
Yeah.
she's still in there and not sure
Yeah.
what's really safe? Yeah.
I love how you put that, right? She's not sure what's really safe
Or who?
or who.
Yeah.
And it's not a her, it's you.
Yeah.
It's a part of your body,
Yeah.
right? There's a part of us. And I had some experiences as a child, and there's a part of me that isn't sure sometimes. Like,
Yeah.
is this person safe?
Yeah.
Right. And so there's the memory, which from an evolutionary or, an organismic standpoint, it's really intelligent.
Mhm.
Like, I want to make sure I'm not in a situation like that again. Great. I'm going to have an alert associated with this kind of thing.
Yeah.
But then it shows up later and like, well, there's still something there. It's a common misconception in a lot of different communities that we just have one experience and we're healed.
Yeah.
I just need that one big experience and I'm free.
Yes.
No, this grew inside me over a period of time through many compounded experiences.
Yes.
And so to heal this and unravel this, it is a period of time,
Mm.
many compounded experiences of something new,
Yeah.
right? So because it's an instinct, it's not a thought. The thought comes after the instinct or because of the instinct.
Mhm.
So to change the instinct, the body has to have enough new experiences that it no longer reacts,
Mhm.
right? So yeah, there's massive insight, there's emotion, there's something new occurring, there's more trust, and there are still also little tendrils of it that are
Yeah.
still present, right? And then progressively over time, they soften and they soften and they soften. And with enough of the right new experiences, the imprint sort of integrates.
Mm.
Right? We could say disintegrates, but it's really integrating into us.
Yeah, fully. And that's where that energy, let's just say that was bound before, this is what feels like it's fueling my heart right now. My heart feels open.
Yeah.
I feel connected to myself, to source, to every sentient being. But there's also a new lens of discernment that's come in, not just since that journey, but the last many years.
Hmm.
The more that I know myself, the more that I have the capacity to know others, right? Like for real, for real. The more that I for real see myself and be with myself, meet myself, at those edges, and then that courage it takes to soften. Um, yeah, I'm really, really grateful that you're languaging this in a way that feels so tender and attuned, to and that you're relating to it, because there will be tendrils um, that I want to also allow for,
Yeah.
like this was interestingly enough, there was a woman who lived with me very temporarily, like 10 weeks. It was almost like, well, I know exactly why she moved in. She
Mm.
ended up having this memory that I was present for. She relived an experience from when she was 5,
Mm.
and she was in it, and I was available for her to be with her and to really just hold sacred space because it was a very, very intense,
Yeah.
prolonged episode. And she'd shared what had happened, obviously, because she's reliving it. And it was that night at about midnight when I realized I now know why she's here in my house.
Mm.
What a gift she is. She brought something up that she's sorting out right now in a really, real brave way. And I hadn't looked at this since I was probably in my 20s.
Mhm.
because again, I was just told by one or two people, you were 5, he was 8,
Mhm.
and I really believed in that. But then when she brought this up, I was like, what was happening for her was so alive, so visceral, and I had so much compassion for her, so much empathy for her. And I was like, wow, can I offer that to myself?
That's it. Yeah, I need that.
Yeah.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I recognized that in my world, there wasn't really anyone that had that capacity in that moment to provide that for me. So it was time for me to give that to myself.
Right. And you could do that by giving it to her.
Yeah.
Right. It's like it's such a beautiful thing that we do these things.
Yeah.
It's like, ah, I recognize that I need this and I'm giving it to me by giving it to you. And then I can really be with me because I recognize it now. I see it in the world. That part of myself is out there in the world. It's for me to see finally.
Yeah. I never identified with shame around that. But once it became clear that it was time for me to be with that, I realized that it was the shame association that was like, no, it was no big deal.
That's
He
it.
was 8, you were 5. And that was the shame sugarcoating something very real that was still alive in me that needed to be seen and loved.
Our culture tends to teach us to minimize these things
Mm, yeah.
instead of asking, how was that for you?
Mm, yeah.
It was scary. It was embarrassing. I didn't know how to say
Confusing
no.
too. It was very confusing.
Confusing.
Yes.
Yeah, all these things, right? And sometimes there can be a guilt that's associated with, well, why did I do it?
Yes.
And the more I learn about the nervous system and nervous system theory, the more I'm like, exactly. Why did I do this? Well, because in situations where I can't run away, where I can't fight, and becoming immobilized doesn't really make sense for me, a social situation, the most intelligent thing for me to do is to appease,
Hmm.
is to acquiesce, is to go
Hmm.
along because I'm going to keep myself alive. Now,
Mm.
it's not a cognitive thing, it's purely instinctive. If I can maintain connection, then I won't be hurt. Maybe I'll be hurt, but not as much as I would be otherwise.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So I go along. And without this being a common knowledge in our culture, we judge survivors and they
Mm.
feel ashamed and they hide it.
Mm.
And I don't know anything about your situation, and I'm just sort of making broad, sweeping
Yep.
statements about this particular potential content that we're talking about here,
Yeah.
right? But once I understood that, everything I make sense.
Hmm. I
And
mean,
once people understand that, and clients specifically, when I work with people, oh, you mean I make sense?
yeah.
I didn't do something wrong.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean something bad about me.
Right.
It doesn't mean that, I should have, notice the word should, I should have said no. I should have run away. I should have done something else. No. What else is there to do? In those moments, we have an instinct, and the instinct says survive.
Yeah.
And that's just the way to do it in that
Mm.
moment.
Yeah. Thank you for that context. And I'm just so curious because I know that a big part of your work, as you mentioned earlier, is attachments, attachment.
Mhm.
And I think a lot of that work, at least the book that changed my life 15 years ago, Attached, that pretty much
Mhm.
everyone knows about.
Immunity.
Um, mhm.
Yeah.
Um, in a lot of ways, well, I'd be very curious what your take is on that. Like, where have you seen and or created more nuance in the evolution of that basic knowledge that came out a long time ago that I still feel very resonant with, but I feel like there's so much more context and texture.
Yeah. There's
Okay,
so
good.
much more.
Okay,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
I don't know your work in this way. I really don't know your work at all. I just know you in this moment and from some glimpses into Instagram, but I felt your energy. So I guess also bioenergetics, I was very different interpretation. So thank you for that. But
Yeah.
yeah, I'd love to know though how, for example, just staying with this story that
Mhm.
I know is probably pretty universal in one way or another. And
Mhm.
that's how does that maybe then inform an attachment style, or does that happen even before that point? I mean, that was 5. That was pretty
3,
young.
5.
Probably was
Uh,
younger if I think about it.
Yeah, maybe a little younger. It probably did have an influence on
Hmm.
safety interpersonally. Being that it was a person that was just a little bit older, that um, it'd be hard to say without knowing you better, Michelle.
Yeah.
But let's
Yes.
just use a context like this and say,
Okay.
well, our attachment style is going to be informed by how we get our needs met from our parents,
Okay.
first and foremost, or our dominant caregivers, we could say, if it's not our parents.
Hmm.
And it emerged out of some research from John Bowlby and then Mary Ainsworth and then Mary Main and then a whole bunch of others. And when we teach about attachment, and my mother and I are teaching a training about this.
Way
She's also
cool.
yeah, she's a clinician, and that when we teach about it, we're teaching about some of those foundational pieces like attachment styles, right? Secure, anxious, avoidant, disorganized. We could break like we've got those 4 core ones that we learned about, and or anxious avoidant, I think is how Amir Levine and them coined it.
Versus disorganized. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. But disorganized just means sometimes I use this strategy, sometimes I use that strategy, right? These all form out of a necessity for survival. And for an infant, survival is about attention and about getting our, like, I need love, I need nutrients, I need potty, right? And like it's just basics, right? And so when those things, when I'm not noticed, when I cry out, or I'm not mimicked when I'm making noises, my brain develops in a totally different way than when I do get those needs met.
Hmm.
That brain development looks like certain relational styles. Those relational styles are essential for getting attention or for self-soothing,
Hmm.
right? For managing the nervous system dysregulation, we would call it, right? So an experience like that might teach the nervous system certain kinds of relational experiences are dangerous. So when getting into certain relational contexts, there's going to be an alarm that goes off. That could mean stay away. It could also mean pull real close, right? It could be either, or it could mean confusion and a little bit of both, right? It depends on the circumstances and more the nuanced experience of that, right? But in those circumstances, there's gonna be a message of sorts that the body receives,
Hmm.
and so then we develop patterns, and there's a very intelligent stacking of patterns, but the formation of a lot of this is happening 0 to 5, 0 to 7,
Okay.
when
Yes.
our foundational nervous system responses to our environment is forming. Interestingly enough, the only way we can affect those strong neural patterns and make them purely malleable again, let me adjust my language. Not the only way. One of the ways that we can stimulate neuroplasticity like that is through psychedelics, specifically MDMA and psilocybin that we know of. Those have been studied. Now, with those two, the brain's able to learn new experiences in a similar way to when we were developing our foundational neural patterns, right? And like sort of map of the world. So it's interesting that some of this stuff comes up and you're having reparative experiences, as sort of we're just talking about you, because that's helping to repattern.
On the psychedelics. Yes.
Correct. But
Mhm.
it's not just the experience. So the experience is a pivotal experience, but it's the following 20 to 30 days.
Yes.
So we're in a neuroplastic state 2 weeks to 30 days afterwards.
Hmm.
And all of our experiences during that time frame are informing new neural activity.
Hmm.
So it's helping us create a new like sense of the world,
Hmm.
danger, safety, threat, safety, that kind of thing. So if we have positive reparative experiences interpersonally, we're repairing that interpersonal rupture earlier on in life. With
Hmm.
a good therapist or within a good therapeutic context, you would say, okay, we're gonna the brilliance of what MAPS is doing, for instance, is that you got 3 or 4 sessions beforehand. You have a man and a woman as therapists. that are meeting with the individual. There's a lot of context built. There's a lot of discussion. Then there's the administration, and both of those individuals are with the individual for the entirety of it. Then there are 3 or 4 more sessions without it following. So there's a context that's supporting the one experience, right?
For
And then
those who
that
aren't familiar with MAPS, can you just quickly expand on that?
MAPS is the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, and they've been doing clinical research trials around the use of MDMA for post-traumatic stress disorder or whatever we call it nowadays. And the results are phenomenal,
Mm.
right? So with something like Zoloft, for instance, I think there's like a 7.8% decrease in symptomology from of depression. It might be more than that. It might be more like 15%. I can't remember the exact number. But with MDMA and the way that they're administering it, it's not
Right.
just the drug, but like the context. There's somewhere between a 43 to a 65% decrease in the symptoms, and most of that's permanent.
Wow.
You stop taking Zoloft, for instance, is the one that they referenced in the talk that I saw that Michael gave, and usually you come back to baseline.
Mhm.
And so a lot of this is the relational component.
Mhm.
So we have a context of safety, we have a context of reparative experiences that are being created. So coming back to what I was saying about context here, when we combine psychedelics with the right kind of reparative experiences, we're retraining our body
Mhm.
that this is no longer a threat. Said another way, this is now okay.
Yeah.
This is what the world will give me now. It's no
Mm.
longer threatening in these particular scenarios because I've now had enough good experiences that my body goes, I don't need that alarm anymore. We're not, there's no, the fire is out, right? But otherwise, the fire alarm's just going off in the background all the time.
Mhm.
We want to help it to help ourselves, help our brain to turn off the fire alarm and go, oh, okay. That experience is now, oh, yeah, that was in the past. It's not happening anymore.
Mm.
Oh, yeah. I have new experiences.
Yes.
Relationships can have an element of safety in them.
Mhm.
I can be vulnerable and be met. It doesn't mean I'm vulnerable everywhere.
Mhm.
I can learn how to have boundaries if I haven't had them. I can learn how to soften them if I've had too strong boundaries,
Mhm.
right? Um, and through my perspective around attachment, there are things we can do that involve movement or certain kinds of gestures that will stimulate the body to have a different kind of reparative experience that doesn't involve thought. You said something earlier that I wanted to circle back around to, which is I was experiencing these emotions, but I didn't have thoughts.
Yeah.
So the job of the brain is to catalog and correlate information, is to make up stories about things. One of the greatest practices we can have is to turn that off and let
Mhm.
ourselves be with what's happening inside our body
Mm.
without a story, without a meaning. Quite often, and I'm trained in Dr. Peter Levine's work, somatic experiencing,
Mm.
and
He's
the
so amazing.
brilliance.
Mm.
Oh yeah, and the brilliance of what he's done is, I think it's the science of shamanism. That's
Mhm.
what I say about it. But he's taken practices that are Eastern informed, that are all over the world, right? And he's created a formula of a way to use it in a targeted fashion to help people resolve traumatic imprints in their bodies. But if we can set aside the meaning until after the body has its experience, we can be with the body's experience without getting in the way of it. When we do that in the right context, like I said at the beginning, with enough stress that we're with it, but not so much that it's too much for our body, afterwards new meaning emerges on its own. And when that new thought emerges on its own, it's like insight that just arrives. Oh my God, maybe it was a big deal for my body.
Yeah.
Kind of like what you said. Like maybe it was something, right?
Mhm.
That happens automatically once we're able to be with some of that in our body.
Mhm.
And instead of us applying more of the analytical psychotherapeutic approach to just psychology, like mental models, we're allowing the body to have its experience, and we're also recognizing that the mind rests on top of all these automatic systems, and it is the
Mm.
interpreter of them. If it's getting an alert, continuously, it's making a meaning about the world to filter through that alert that says this person's a threat, this person's a threat, that's a threat, that's a threat.
Yeah.
But they're not, maybe. I mean, maybe they are, but maybe they're not.
Yeah, it's so interesting if I kind of weave in the touch points of this conversation, and we started with it doesn't have to be hard. It doesn't have to be hard. It can, and it might be in moments, but it doesn't necessarily have to be hard all the time.
Yeah.
Then we wove in PTSD that humanity is facing, irrespective of what your thoughts are, what your opinion is, or what you were certain of happened or is happening as a result of the COVID era. And me recognizing that I was carrying so much grief and trauma to the point where I then put myself into a medicine journey for the first time in years, and just cried all night without any story. And I look at that journey for like the next year and a half basically to current time from about a month ago, and it's the way that I would say it without any clinical references or your work is that my body had gone through so much during the COVID era. And I had already thought everyone was danger, right? Even those that I thought for sure were supposed to protect me. And even the skies are dangerous. The food is
Yeah.
dangerous. The soil's dangerous, right? Everything is dangerous. Those towers are dangerous. And learning to be with all of that and find my center, find my heart, find my love, find my joy for living again and again and again and again. And then it's almost as if I was being prepared to then have this woman come through that lived with me briefly, that was completely meant to show me, mirror where I was to go next in my own evolution.
Mm,
And so then you bring us to current time, and it's been like 21 days since that mushroom journey,
mm,
which then, according to what you're saying, is like, yeah, that's real. And it does feel like there was such a softening.
mhm.
Now, I'm curious though, as we talk then about attachment theory and really bringing it to the moment, is can someone evolve into secure?
Yeah.
If, oh, beautiful, because I wouldn't know until I'm actually in another intimate relationship with a man,
Yeah.
but it feels as if that's where I am. That's where I want to be. That's what I'm attracted to in people, right?
Mm,
I love the dynamics of the others just to observe and be friends with and whatever, but it doesn't interest me. You know what I mean? In the way that it would hook me unconsciously before.
yeah.
Okay, so yeah, so it
We
feels like I'm on that track, and that excites me so deeply because I didn't know that you could change that. I thought that was just kind of always what it was, but you're just in a new relationship with it.
Yeah, they call it earn secure, or we call it earn secure. It's
Ah,
as the body learns a new map, we could say. It's progressive because most of our life we've been getting feedback from our environment that's one way. So training our body to respond differently means like consecutive reparative experiences, and also some experiences that it didn't go well. Oh, it went well. Oh, I
yes,
tried something new. I got my need met. I tried
yes.
something new. It didn't go well. I got this, then I was reconnected. Right.
Mm.
So it's the oscillation, where the body learns something brand new. It's okay. I've got a new map, and then I'm attracted to, and this is something you were mentioning, right? I'm attracted to, I'm drawn to somebody um, that there aren't extremes with,
Yes,
right? The person's not evaporated,
yes.
right? Or the
Hollow.
person's hollow. Great. Yeah, that's a good word. Or the
Yeah.
person's not like really intensely leaned in, right?
Yes.
They're just sort of like not neutral, but they're
Steady.
cool. Yeah,
It
steady.
feels steady. It feels steady. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so there isn't this big jolt of hormones,
Right.
right?
Which
One
can
of my
be
teachers
which can be confusing. Okay, yeah.
can be 100%.
Yeah,
Yeah,
not
my
anymore, but yes, I remember when that was confusing.
yep, yep. Well, some of my first teachers that I really went deep with were astrologers and psychologists. They studied Carl Jung's work and Milton Erickson's work, so hypnotism and depth psychology. And Linda Brady was her name, and she would say to me, "That feeling, that big rush, those are the karmic warning bells."
Mm.
So her way of framing it was that's a
Mm.
karmic, that's not a soulmated relationship. That's a karmic relationship.
Mm.
which is just another way of saying what we're saying here with attachment dynamics, right? It's something, it's a resonance with our history versus a resonance with something else,
Mm.
right? And those karmic warning bells are usually, you're about to learn a lesson. There's all of that dumping of excitement hormones in our body. Well, does that really equal what we call, soulmated relationship would be that steadiness? She'd
Yes,
say,
yes,
yeah, soulmated relationship is boring. And I don't think it's necessarily boring because there's novelty, there's goodness. It's not the same kind of extreme.
yeah. Yeah, I guess it just depends on where you are and maybe, what you need, right, ultimately, and or what
Yeah.
you desire, and then getting clarity around that to be in alignment with your behaviors and actions and ways of being. But I don't even get the karmic bells anymore. But what I have noticed is, and this happened recently, I was meeting someone for the first time and only time, it's so far, and I was like, oh. This is so cool. Like I was thinking about this after, well, even during, and it was, I remember when this would have hooked me.
Hmm.
Person is a great person. This person is like a good person. I feel that. And
Hmm.
yet this person is not for me. But I
Yeah.
remember when this very energy of kind of pull away, because the classic avoidant, right?
Yeah.
Until then I pull away, then come. And it's so subtle now because I'm actually meeting a more sophisticated
Yeah.
avoidant.
Yeah.
Um, and yet just so beautiful to catch it and to be like, oh, and almost like, good girl, Michelle. Like, like, wow, I'm proud of you. Like, and it's no effort, by the way. I don't want to
Yeah.
make
Yeah.
it seem like it's hard to like walk away from it. It's not. It's like, just like, it's just honoring and acknowledging my own growth, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. I do. I do. Yeah. Well, and something else I want to say for you all listening, um, there's nothing wrong with our attachment styles.
Thank you.
They are how we survived. They are the
Yes.
most intelligent response to a set of circumstances where we absolutely needed them,
Yes.
right? So hopefully, if we're more anxiously dominant, we find ourselves in a relationship with somebody who's a little bit more secure and or is willing to meet us in our feelings.
Mhm.
Because gradually over time, we
Mm.
have what's called earned secure, which is, oh, I feel safe and I feel secure here, and I'm no longer anxious about this person wandering away.
Yes.
Right. And they're finding their way to the middle, wherever that is for them,
Hmm.
without it being over the top.
Mm.
And and one of the things that I feedback I've gotten from people about that book Attached is that they read it and then they felt bad. Like, well, what do I do? I'm this thing and I should be this thing. Cue shame. I'm anxious. I should be secure. Or I'm totally secure. Like reading this book, I'm totally secure. No, it's, I mean, maybe, but it's what happens when we're severely distressed. It's not what happens when we're feeling calm.
Mm.
It's what happens when we're really, really distressed.
Mm.
That's how it shows up. And it's fine. It's it's great. It's how we survived.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Well, and thank you for that because the only way you really know is, first of all, being present to it, right? And being
Yeah.
willing to just be present to any particular given moment when you are highly stressed or de-stressed,
Yeah.
or, when your edges are out, when the thorns need to be watered, kind of
Yep.
thing. And you don't get the rose without the thorns. So make sure you water those thorns too. Yeah, this is such meaningful work, and really it brings us to really the fourth part of your mission, it seems, and that is really helping to cultivate an aliveness in our hearts. And so I know that we're getting close to the end, but I want to loop back to one thing that you had said that might tap us into more aliveness in our heart, but just this whole conversation feels that way for me. And that is, you said that you could easily teach like a couple of like sort of hand gestures or things that we could do. And I believe you were talking about like somatic release.
Mm.
Was that what it was?
I think I was saying we don't release things, but there are things we can do to help ourselves feel more deeply.
I see. So
And
you don't resonate with the term somatic release.
no, and the
Oh, this
reason,
is so good. I love it.
yeah,
Tell us why.
because we don't ever release energy.
We're just moving it.
We're feeling finally.
Oh, Oh, yes, of
We're
course.
regaining our energy. It's been being used to constrict, and if we stop constricting, of course we feel more aliveness. But
Hmm.
we're not getting rid of it. It doesn't go out of our body. We actually have access to it finally. I call it integration instead of releasing. So it's not an emotional release, it's an emotional experience. I don't want to get rid of my emotions. I want to be able to feel them without trying to stop them or get it over with quickly. Right? We begin our training with a quote from Joseph Campbell, and I'm not going to get the whole quote here, but I'll summarize. He says, people say that what everybody's seeking is a meaning for life, right? But I don't think so. I think that what people are seeking is an experience of being alive so that they can experience the full rapture of being alive. And, I believe in essence, what it is to be a human is to feel our aliveness, which means that we have the capacity to experience the range of human emotion. Like this idea that emotion could be bad in any way at all is cultural conditioning. And that's what keeps us bound and stuck in our bodies. The field of somatics is the immersion into our living process. When people say the word somatic, they think it means body, but that's because of Western medicine reducing it to just being the physical form. And that is because of the Cartesian era that viewed the body as a machine that could be operated on from the outside with an assumption that what we can see from the outside, we know better than what we feel on the inside. So, soma is our living process, it's the whole of us. That occurs because we're bodied, right? But to experience our aliveness is to reconnect with our senses.
Mm,
It involves feeling our living process. And that also involves having the ability to experience a range of emotions, what we call good and what we call bad, tolerating our sadness, tolerating our anger, tolerating our joy, right? Like they're just sensory experiences. It's the not being cut off from our aliveness. It's removing the barriers to sensing and feeling that aliveness.
mm,
And so I say, no, no, I'm not having a somatic release. I'm experiencing my living process right now. And that involves emotion and energy and sensory experience. And so we have practices that we do to feel that aliveness.
mm,
And whenever we're cultivating a sense of ourselves, we're cultivating that aliveness,
mm,
right? More connection to life through our living process, right? Not cut off from, not getting rid of, not getting out of our bodies, but really being here, present with it. This is the vehicle for me to experience all of my aliveness. I'm pointing to my body for those of you that are just listening to this. Without my connection to this, I'm not really alive. I'm attempting to be something I'm not.
mm.
I'm attempting to turn into a spirit instead of really experiencing the richness of the texture of life
Yeah.
through me, my organism. So
Mm.
that's not giving you a process right now, but that's sort of giving you some philosophy around it.
That's quite beautiful, though. Aho is what I really want to say. Yeah, really, really rich. Um, yeah, I'm very curious. I know we have just a couple more minutes. I'm very curious after what you just shared because I've been sharing also intuitively to so many of the women that I work with and friends that there's no hierarchy in emotion. And I just
Mhm.
don't believe that shame, for example, it's supposed to be the lowest of the frequencies, is any it's just like not worse than enlightenment or love or authenticity.
Mhm.
And of course, there's a lot of research and study, and I don't have a ton of context whatsoever. I just want to make space for it all. And I
Mhm.
and I want to be with all parts of me so that the more that I can be with the shame and the guilt and the anger and the rage and the whatever, the more that I can be with my joy and my bliss and my peace
Yep.
and my compassion, right? And so
Mhm.
I'm very curious what your thoughts are on the work of David Hawkins and his map of consciousness and how that weaves into
Mhm.
your beautiful philosophy.
I haven't done a lot of research on
Mm.
the map of consciousness, but I do have a response about
Mm.
emotion.
Yes.
Um, some teachers that have really deeply inspired me outside of spiritual traditions are a teacher named Stanley Kellerman,
Okay.
Keleman, Bonnie Bainbridge Cohen, Ron Kurtz, and the list goes on, but I'm going to just sort of pause with those three. With Bonnie and Stanley, and Kellerman was friends with Joseph Campbell, and they would give these lectures. They wrote a book together called Myth and the Body.
Mm.
Kellerman explains the biological process, and Campbell explains the myth and how the two intersect. It's beautiful. It's a great book. It's short. But the whole reason for me saying that is because for thousands of years now, culturally, we have imagined ourselves as being created. We've imagined ourselves as being created collectively because of the spread of Abrahamic religions. I'm not saying this what I'm about to say to put down religion in any way at all. I think it has a place and it can be really wonderful and useful. And if we set aside the assumption that we were created and instead adopt a perspective that we grow, we're a living, growing process. The
Mhm.
way that we approach ourselves and imagine ourselves and conceptualize our processes is completely different because there's not something outside of us creating us. We are a biological living organism that's an organism process. I say all of that to sort of lay the foundation for what I'm going to say about emotions. From a biological perspective, emotions are intelligent. Love connects me to my mate, which furthers my desire to procreate, which attaches me to my young, which stimulates me to protect them and keep them alive. Anger keeps me safe and protects me from threats. It allows me to protect myself and my space. It mobilizes me. Shame keeps me from harming the group. It keeps me belonging to the tribe. Now it's maladaptive when we are shaming ourselves, right? Judging ourselves, right? And we have cultures of using shame to manipulate behavior, and that's a whole thing. We could spend a whole episode talking about that. But the short-lived version of shame is intelligent, it's useful because it keeps us from harming each other. I think guilt is a thought mostly. And I think
Mhm.
most shame is thought generated.
Mhm.
But we have like joy keeps us engaged with life. It keeps us in that living process.
Mhm.
Excitement moves us towards something.
Mhm.
And as an organism, we have this impulse to grow, to continue to grow, right? And shape ourselves and form ourselves. And so I think we could look at sort of the hierarchy of needs or Maslow's hierarchy of needs and things like that. And I don't know that those are necessarily important in the context of what we're talking about here, but emotion has a place. It's really important for us to be able to have those things
Mhm.
because it stimulates behavior and it's driven by the autonomic nervous system.
Mhm.
The limbic system plays a part in that, and it involves our body and it involves our relationships. Right? So there's this wonderfully intelligent thing that occurs through us. And when we can experience it without it taking us over, and this is what I think the mystics teach us, it's how to be with ourselves without being consumed by the animal process. When we can learn to tolerate and be with it, it does not drive us, but we can still experience it.
Mhm.
Um, I think that's where the thought ends for now.
Yes, it was so well heart received. Yeah, emotion drives behavior. And then just being, aware of is that behavior serving where I really want to go, right? And how I want to
Mhm.
live and the lifestyle that I want to create and legacy I want to leave,
Yeah.
kind of thing. And so, yeah, it's beautiful because I too have been just so many people can feel trapped in certain emotions or constructs of the mind that then make them feel like they're experiencing this as an
Yeah.
emotion, i.e., guilt and or shame. But I just, the hierarchy, it's like, what if they were all just colors in a crayon box?
Yeah.
And what if we came to planet Earth as an example? Depends on someone's belief, but most people in this
Hmm.
show is like, I want to experience it all. And we're
Yeah.
here on this planet at this time for what's happening.
Hmm.
Like, we've asked for like the fast track package.
Yeah.
And so with that is going to come some gentle guidance and masterful teachers like yourself that have taken the time to devote yourself to this work to be of real service to those that are like, okay, I feel like I'm skating on ice every day for the first time. Help me out. I
Yeah.
don't want to exit prematurely, right? And
Hmm.
so this is just, yeah, just a beautiful weaving of really landing in the arena of real life in the here and now that doesn't necessarily have to be hard, but here are
Yeah.
some other ways to be with the trauma, the somatics, the attachment style that you've cultivated over the years based on survival and the possibilities within that now, earn secure if you want, and
Yeah.
not shaming yourself wherever you are. And
Hmm.
thank you for that little note. And then how all this really does drive the aliveness in the heart, which I think
Hmm.
is really the whole point for me
Yeah.
anyway, of being here is to live from my heart that is fully
Hmm.
alive, and that means feeling it all.
Yeah. We are conscious creatures attempting to make sense of something that doesn't make sense. When in reality, if we can move this, take the sense making and put it aside, really we're here to experience life without barrier.
Mm,
But the mind, language, maybe creates a barrier. But when we remove those barriers, we're left with the texture of life.
mm,
I'm a
mm,
part of this mastermind with this really extraordinary man who was the chief of the First Nations in the Yukon for a while. And he said something to me. And I guess, we can kind of leave this thought with everybody. There's a time that the ancients talk about that you can experience right now when you go out into nature and you spend extended periods of time there, where you experience the language before words. There's a language that's a natural language that's present in our ecosystem, that when we're with it long enough, the words fall away and we sense it. We don't need words, but we understand it. And humans instinctively know it because before language, that was our language. Before words, it was how we communicated. And that's what animals live inside of. And there's this really rich texture to it that we cannot use words to describe because it's something that's felt. Watts has this wonderful lecture where he says, go outside and don't catalog everything you see. Just be with it as if you're experiencing it for the first time. Right? There are no words.
mm.
And I think that's what we're here to do. We're here
Yes.
to experience life in its
Mm,
richest, fullest form.
yes.
And we've built boxes for ourselves that keep
Mm,
us stuck in inhibiting ourselves. And
mm,
that aliveness, that spark of life is within each of us.
mm,
And we just have to get rid of the barriers, just merely removing the barriers to feeling again and
mm,
connecting to our aliveness.
mm. Yes, yes, yes. So as one of my faves would say, Ram Dass, and I know that he and Watts were dear friends.
Oh, I listen to his story and I'm like, Ram, 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 I get you.
Oh, same. I listen to him almost every night still. I find a lecture and I'm just like, this is it. This is it. This is still it. Well, thank you so much for bringing your aliveness to this moment. I'm really grateful that we were able to make this happen. Where's the best place for people to learn about your work?
Two places. So I both run a training company teaching practitioners, and I run my own private practice. So Instagram's where I spend most of my time at Trauma and Somatics, and at Will Rezin, Rezin, and then willreason.com and traumaandsomatics.com. Either of those places, you'll find ways that you can communicate with me. I don't have somebody answering messages for me on social media. So if you send me a message, it will be me who responds on my personal account. I do have somebody that manages the company account. So it might be me, it might be somebody else responding. But if you want to speak with me directly, you feel free to send me a message on social media.
That's how I get you.
That's right.
Trauma and somatics, did you birth that into the world?
I did. My son, me and my ex-fiance birthed a company in 2020
Wow,
and
it's grown to what, 400 practitioners around the world?
a little over 400 now. And I think over 26 countries we've helped and supported people. It's such a deep honor. I
Mm,
didn't imagine myself in this place,
mm,
but it's sort of come to me. It's like happened to me,
mhm,
and I've stepped into it fully now. My ex, she moved on to do other things, and I've taken over the company. And you know, teaching and working with practitioners is so close and near and dear to my heart, and
mm,
it's so natural for me. Um, as you can see, I'm like in our conversation, I'm really curious and I love learning about the technical things. And so it's been a real joy. And the private clients I work with, I don't work with a lot of them. They're high performers,
yeah.
a very specific demographic of a certain kind of people that find me, and we do really deep work over like a year, maybe two. Longest client's been 5 years. No, I think it's six now. Um, I just love supporting human beings. And so whether it's teaching practitioners to do it in a way that's more loving and safe and well-rounded, or whether it's working individually with individuals, it's really deep, near and dear to my heart.
Yeah, and it feels that way, when you look at what you've built and expanded into on, for example, just Instagram. There's so much there to be with and to learn from, even just in the little sort of snapshots. And you can tell the energetic behind it is you.
Mm-hmm.
So there's other accounts that teach on similar type of stuff, but for me, I haven't experienced the transmission that I feel when I'm going through your content. I'm forced to slow down. I'm
Mm-hmm.
forced to get present. And in fact, it's really just taking a few and be with those rather than just trying to binge the page for a day. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Those are all clips from teaching.
Yeah.
Um, and you're right. I mean, even my rhythm today, it's slower.
Yeah.
And this is what people say to me. And what I offer my students a lot is a quote from Watts, or a reference of Watts, where he says, "It's not the notes in the music that define the music; it's the space between."
Mm,
And in life, it's not what we're doing; it's the emptiness between what we're doing and what we're not doing. Right? It's the not doing that defines us. In exercise, it's the rest that makes it possible for growth to happen, not the effort.
yeah.
And on a saw blade, it's not the teeth that cut; it's the space between them. Otherwise, it would be a wheel.
Mhm.
Right? So there's a natural rhythm. Do you know Adrian Grenier?
Yeah.
He talks about earth speed.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, I think his whole thing, right? He did a thing around this talking about this. And I believe that we have the speed of nature
Mhm.
that is different than the speed of technology.
Mhm.
It's not the speed of light,
Mm-mm.
it's the speed of slow growth.
Yes.
And we are organic matter that grows very slowly. And when we're connected to that natural rhythm, something changes about us. And when we move slow, people feel safer.
Mm, mm.
And it's not a thing I try to do, but it is sort of how I inhabit myself these days. And people constantly say to me, "I just feel so safe with you." I'm like, "Thanks. I'm not trying," but it's wonderful to hear. But I think it's because my pace is slower. It's
Yeah.
predictable,
Mhm,
you know.
mhm.
So, well, thank you. That's my way of saying thank you.
Yes, it's wonderful. I love it. Well, thank you again for bringing your heart and all of your slowness. That's an aliveness. It's beautiful. Yeah. Turtle medicine was really important for me in 22 and 23. I had a figurine on my desk the whole time, and it was take all the time you need as I was trying to
Yeah,
figure out how to like be in the world again after that just utter deconstruction and I'm
I
so
love
glad
it.
that I did, but it's interesting. I will say that while I learn from nature every day, and every day, every day, every day, I'm experiencing a quickening and like I'm thinking of something, wondering if it would be possible, and then like next day it's here. But
Yep.
yet my whole life feels like it's slow. And I don't know how to explain that. It's just magic, but you probably know what's actually happening.
I don't know if I have an explanation for that, but I do know that when I'm slower and more intentional, I notice the things. And it does seem like that happens.
Yeah.
When I'm really with myself and I'm not rushing or filling the space between everything, it's like I'll have that insight and then within a day or sometimes hours, I get a phone call or have an interaction that is exactly what I needed. Yeah,
Yeah.
can't explain it. I think we used to live that way as humans.
Mhm.
Before the advent of technology, I think we did. I think we were in tune enough with our environment that we could, that happened for us. There are stories of that from the ancients, um, stories about us as humans sort of having the ability to live that way.
Yeah, people call it, you know what, the the telepathy, the
Uh-huh.
synchronicities. There's a whole bunch of different terms for it. I don't know. Again, with you, like
Yeah.
those are just words, but the
Yeah.
context is what I'm really interested in. But if I go, I can't imagine trying to go looking for it. It's just almost like this little wormhole that I have found myself in, and it feels good and right. And I'm just noticing there's so much magic in there. And
Yeah.
and and it feels wildly abundant and prosperous. And then I noticed I felt bad about even having these experiences, and like so much of the world is suffering and just so mentally fragile. And it's just like, but wait a second, I don't have to be braggadocious about this, but I
Yeah.
can lead with this light. It's like it's
Mhm.
okay to be heart forward, fully alive. The
Yeah.
world needs to know that that's still out there, you
Oh,
know?
I love that. I had a meeting with a client about an hour before us, and that was part of the content. It was um, we're all given gifts. If we measure our gift against somebody else and we don't use it because we're afraid that their feelings are gonna be hurt, then that's the selfish thing. It's not actually selfish, like really embodying and inhabiting the gifts, right? Like because of the body that I'm in, I have certain, maybe we could call them privileges. That's an opportunity to help the world.
Yeah,
Now I could use it for my own self-serving, like self-satisfaction, or I could use it to do something.
yeah,
Right? And when we really own it and claim it and we don't judge ourselves for it, it's amazing what we can do in the world.
yes.
Because you're right, somebody needs it.
Somebody
And
needs.
by us showing up and doing it, we're giving that gift to the world.
Yeah. It's almost like a permission slip in these times that I feel like are going to intensify and accelerate, to say the least. And it's like, great, I'm going to intensify and accelerate what the frequency that I'm in.
That's it.
And the more that I do that, then maybe that helps others remember their light, right? And
Yeah.
then that compounds. So I'm not saying bypass any of this stuff. Like your work is absolutely needed. I couldn't be here if I wasn't deep into that in my own
Mhm.
way without ever gone through your channels. But I
It's a
just
both and.
exactly. And it's just yeah, just yet another reminder to me because I really have been in this little my light feels so bright. Like I don't even know. It's like, oh. But at the same time, all of my friends, this is what we are behind the scenes. We're just like
Mhm.
it's just such an honor to be alive. It's just so beautiful to be in love with nature and to recognize if there's going to be a deity, that's it. And it's just oh yeah, just extremely grateful. So yeah.
I think you're doing really important work, and I went through some of the interviews that you've been doing and some of the stuff that you share, and I'm like, yes, somebody has to carry the light. It's
Oh,
imperative that we bring people close to the light and remind them, hey, this is here, and not to bypass all of the other parts of life, but to remember. Because if we can't remember that, then why bother?
exactly. This is my whole thing. It's like, remember who you really are. I'm in service to the Great Awakening, call it New Earth, call it whatever.
Yeah,
I'm just in service to being fully and wholly alive, you
that's
know?
it. That's
Let's
right.
do it.
Yep, that's it. Let's be alive.
All right, for reals, I'm going to say goodbye and just again, so much gratitude to you, Will. Thank you again.
Thank you.